and so that you have some perspective of that. I came into the program September the 8th, 1975, and there were two meetings in all of Bay City. We didn't even have a Bay Cities area, in fact. There was Northern California and Southern California. I had no idea that not only were there no meetings in the Valley, I had no idea that that's where Narcotics Anonymous started in California. I mean, I could barely, I never went to my first year convention in 1976. I was so wasted, clean, I was wasted, that they let me stay home and open up the Saturday night meeting while everyone went off to the convention that year. And I loved that. That was fun. I had my first sponsee ask me to sponsor them. I had 14 months clean. And this is what it was like. We had to go to AA meetings because up here in the West Side, that is now West Side, and Bay Cities, that is Bay Cities, the first and only meeting that they had that I went to was Redondo Beach meeting. And then there was this one in Westchester, which they told me months and months later that even existed. I didn't even know it existed. Other than that, all of us went to AA meetings, but all the addicts went together. And we knew that this was our meeting. And when I had 6 months clean, Bobby came home from a convention. And he said to me, he said, you know, I am only going to go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings. It scared me to death. I said, what are we going to do? We don't have any. So this sponsor started meetings by Redondo Beach, which is now Bay Cities. And Bobby and I started meetings here in Santa Monica, Venice, all the area, West Side, over here. That was the beginning. That was what it was like when I came in. And let's go back to the very early history of which, believe it or not, I just realized I was born around that time. I was an innocent at that time. I'm going to take it back to the mid-1920s. Okay? I'm going to read the next few pages. I want you to know that my sponsee typed this for me. You know I'm getting old. You know my eyesight is going. But this does help. In the mid-20s, I'm going to read these next few pages, and then I will talk with you and be able to share with you just what happened early in our history. Addicts were admitted to the United States Public Health Service hospitals, but effective treatment for addicts still had not been found. The government thought the problem was so important that in 1929, Congress authorized funds for the development of two heroin treatment programs. One of the programs was started in 1935 at the U.S. Public Hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, and the other in 1938 at the U.S. Public Hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. The programs were run as psychiatric hospitals. Between 1935 and 1964, more than 87,000 addicts were treated at both Lexington and Fort Worth hospitals. Over time, the health service reported success with some of the patients using therapy, reduced drugs, and reduced dosages, I should say, and substitute drugs. Sometimes restraints were used during detox. They did this to me when I was detoxing. It's all the same thing. But no treatment could be found that helped addicts with any consistency. As you all know, in 1935, Alcoholics Anonymous was founded. Then in 1944, an alcoholic named Houston S. got into AA and started helping others get into recovery. One of the men he helped was Harry, who was able to stop drinking but could not stop using drugs. We all know that. Harry was arrested for possession of drugs and sent to the Lexington Hospital. In 1947, Houston was sent to Kentucky by the company he worked for. He kept thinking about Harry's problem, how Harry could stop using drugs. Houston wondered to himself, why couldn't the 12 steps of AA help someone addicted to drugs? What a concept. So Houston called Dr. Vogel, who was then a medical officer at the Lexington Hospital, and offered to start a 12-step group in the hospital. On February 16th, 1947, the first meeting was held. They called the group Addicts Anonymous. Houston attended meetings every week until 1963. Harry, who had been going in and out of hospital, started going to these meetings himself, and this time it worked. A New York City man named Danny C., who had been in and out of hospitals and prisons, came to Lexington, and after 8 returns to the hospital for treatment, he made his final return and started going to meetings there. He brought the first known meeting back to New York City in 1949. An article in the New York Times dated June 18, 1950, says, quote, "The New York City chapter of Narcotics Anonymous was started 5 months ago by a discharged patient from the U.S. Public Health Service Hospital in Lexington. Like other members, he is known only by his first name, Danny." End of the quote. The first meetings were held at the House of Detention in Manhattan, and then later at Presbyterian Labor Temple on East 14th Street and the YMCA Center on 23rd Street. Meetings were held at the YMCA for 12 years. But in the 1960s, meetings disappeared in New York because of what was called the Rockefeller Law, which banned addicts, even clean addicts, from congregating and associating with each other under penalty of arrest. NA wouldn't come back to New York until years later, after the law was repealed. All the way across the country in California, in the early 1950s, there were at least 7 separate attempts to start a group or some kind of program for addicts like Jimmy K. Well, addicts in the Los Angeles area. Some addicts like Jimmy K., who got clean and Alcoholics Anonymous in February of 1950, were just not comfortable in AA meetings, as they were mostly unwelcome to speak about any drug other than alcohol. And that's how. Right? Sure. I don't know. We're not comfortable in AA. I've got to watch my hands, as they were mostly unwelcome to speak about any drug other than alcohol. Thank you. Finally, in 1953, the addicts started NA in California. At first, it was called the San Fernando Valley AA and NA meeting. But one of the founders, Jimmy K., did not approve of calling it AA-NA. The group drew up its own bylaws and how this new fellowship would function differently from Alcoholics Anonymous. From the very beginning, the 12 steps included the words, "powerless over our addiction." Jimmy saw to that. Not any particular substance. And all the steps and traditions were changed to start with the word "we." In September of 1953, the new group received a response from the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, giving their permission to use the steps and traditions, but telling us that the AA name could no longer be used, so the name was changed eventually to Narcotics Anonymous, soon after to Narcotics Anonymous. October 5th, 1953, in North Hollywood was the first meeting of the newly formed fellowship called Narcotics Anonymous. In 1959, for a period of time, NA disappeared, as it did in New York, due to the personalities and the failure to follow the traditions. But then it came back, and in 1962, Bob B. came in, and he's been here ever since. It's 35 years that he's been here. Also in 1962, the first little white book was published, laying out the program without any personal stories. In 1964, the Board of Trustees was formed for the purpose of ensuring that NA doesn't die again. In 1965, NA was started in Northern California. In 1966, the second little white book came out, including the personal story. In 1968, Jimmy K. designed the NA symbol while he was in the hospital fighting tuberculosis. In 1970, there were 20 meetings worldwide. NA's growth was very slow at that time, with most addicts around the world still having no hope for recovery from our disease. There were very few places in California starting meetings. Most meetings were isolated, but there was nowhere else for addicts to go. Only a very few fortunate addicts found other addicts willing and able to take them into their homes where they could pick drugs. And I have to tell you, in the mid 70s, when I came in, and very shortly thereafter, in our home, Bobby and I, we had a room in our home that we called the recovery room. And for 8 years, we had approximately 8 years, we had addicts coming in either off of the streets or from the meetings or whatever it was so that they could get in our home. Let me tell you, I will never forget the time when Bobby got a call from this man from Alcoholics Anonymous who had 44 years sober at the time. And he said, you know, I found this woman who was lying on the floor, and we thought she was drunk. She just passed out, but she had been drinking. She told us she was drinking. He said, we could have taken care of that. When we went to pick her up, there was a needle hanging out of her arm. He said, we didn't know what to do. So we called Narcotics Anonymous. Help. We called it at that time the hotline. We called the Narcotics Anonymous hotline. And without my knowing it, two men come with this little woman who was hanging on to both their arms into the house when I walked in. And Bobby said, surprise. No, he didn't. He said, these men brought this woman, honey, you have to help her. And God bless this man, this 44 years sober, who had the courage to say, we couldn't do it. We did not know what to do with an addict. So we called the hotline of Narcotics Anonymous. What an incredible thing that was. Well, let me tell you about this woman. This woman could not stop talking. She was in the house for 3 days, and for 24 hours, she was talking. And if I wanted to go to the John, Sydney, don't leave me. You know, no matter what, don't leave me. In one day, I was so exhausted. I called up my sponsees, who were very new at that time, who came over to the house, and we were taking turns, taking her into the shower, going to the shower with her. This is how we detoxed. We didn't know it then that you weren't supposed to put a towel in someone's mouth when they started convulsing. Today, they don't let you do that. But then we didn't know anything. We thought this is what you do. You take a towel, put it, and she started convulsing over and over again. Finally, when we called the paramedics, they had no hospital to take her to. They were filled. They were filled with the emergency hospitals, so they just couldn't take them. She had no money. So we kept her the whole weekend. And this is what all addicts, most addicts were doing at that time. They came into our homes and they detoxed there, and most of them were able to stay at meetings. And that's what happened there. I only have 2 more pages to go. 1971, the very first World Convention, WCNA1, was held at the La Mirada Country Club in Southern California. The cost of registration was $5, with an additional $5 for the banquet. Gone are those days. Jimmy Kay spoke on the history of Narcotics Anonymous. Jimmy had been in the hospital at the time of the convention, but Bob B. went there in the afternoon, picked Jimmy up, brought him back to the convention, and brought him back to the hospital after the meeting. In 1972, the World Service Office moved into its first location on Crenshaw Boulevard in Los Angeles. There were now 70 meetings worldwide. Also that year, the WCNA2 was held in North Hollywood. 150 addicts attended, hearing Jimmy Kay speak Saturday night and Pepe, God bless her, Pepe A. Sunday morning. In 1973, the Third World Convention was held in San Jose. 400 addicts were in attendance. That year, NA celebrated its 20th anniversary. There were only two so-called areas, if you want to call them areas, in California at the time. There was just Southern California and Northern California. Southern California alone had 32 meetings. Northern California had 13 meetings. And there were another 20 meetings outside California. At this time, the San Fernando Valley decided to go off on their own and start their own area. The San Fernando Valley Area Service Committee was born. In 1974, what happened? Well, in 1974, the WSO moved to Highland Avenue in Hollywood. The following year, 1975, the World Service Office moved to a suicide prevention center. I was a newcomer when I went there to my first meeting. It was so depressing. I cannot tell you. We shortly moved out of there, and that's Sun Valley. And then in 1983, around 1983, we moved to Wyandotte. And I want to tell you about that. Soon after we moved in, it was just all completely open. There were no offices in there. It needed painting and needed a lot of work. And I said, how big it is. And it had a loft. I said, oh my God, you could put so many things up there. Well, the loft you couldn't put anything into. It would fall down on you. But then they painted on the door, World Service Office. I had come down from where I lived, which was over the hill to the valley, and I drove up and I see WSO. I've got to tell you, I drove around the block 10 times just looking at the door with the name World Service Office on it. And I said, oh my God, that feeling's still there in me when I talk about it. And today, of course, we all know it's in Northridge. That year, the NA service tree was approved. The service tree was written by Greg P., who was very important in our early history, still is. I think he lives somewhere in Florida, but I'm not certain of that. And it's still clean, served as a trustee, left the service commitment, and came back in 1986 as a trustee again. That's the end of what I'm going to read out of. I do have notes, and I was hoping to do this without having to read it, without having notes. I just can't. I'm the worst when it comes to remembering dates. So what I'm going to do from now on, instead of taking the risk and the chance of putting the date down, I'm going to just say early 60s or 70s or early 80s, middle 80s, later 80s, early 90s, whatever it is. I just can't be concerned about that. So I'd like to really talk about how it was when we first started getting into service and how different it was then. What happened really at this time, of course, we know that we had a drug use explosion. The 60s and the 70s was a counterculture. It was a psychedelic revolution. The Vietnams produced junkies. I'll never forget that. I remember that so clearly. Drug use became open. Children were watching their parents and what they were doing, how cool they were using drugs. Of course, that came down to the children eventually. I had gone to my first World Service Conference, I think it was in the early 1980s. And I remember walking in. I still remember some of the addicts who were there. And they had these little flags that were going up and down like this. Every time they voted, up went the flag and came down. And sometimes they just go crazy, didn't know what was happening. Fist fights were about to begin. They says, well, take it outside. I said, this is insane. I will never come to another conference again. Let me tell you what that taught me. Never to say never. Because after that, when I became a trustee, and even before that, I was there at every conference thereafter. I was sitting at a meeting. I think I had around 5 or 6 years clean, in between, really in between. And the secretary of the meeting said, he holds up this book in one hand, and he's reading this letter from a Bo S. from Atlanta, Georgia. And he says, this must be a mistake. He said, why are they sending us this? You should be going to the area we had started from the tree. We had started, in fact, we had the first meeting of learning about the tree at our home when I had 10 months clean. How to start an area, how to take from the group to the area, from the area to the region, from regions to the world. We started studying that. Okay, so here he is holding up this book in one hand and reading from the letter. He says, these addicts are coming in from out of town somewhere, and this book here, they're calling it the Gray Book. They want input from addicts in California because they're going to hold a World Literature Committee before they have the conference. And he said, some mistake. He's about to throw it away. And I piped up, this is so exciting. I didn't know there were addicts anywhere outside of California. I really didn't know they existed. I mean, you have to understand, I was interested in getting some kind of recovery. I wanted to know what the steps meant. I had no idea. I had to work hard on knowing what was happening in my recovery. I had no idea about conferences or conventions. I had an idea because I went to the second one since I've been clean at the Jack Tar in San Francisco, where you would find Bo, who had come in from Georgia also at that time. And Bo had been asking around and saying, has anyone started a big book about Narcotics Anonymous? You couldn't find any answer. No one could answer him. So what happened was he went to Jimmy. He found Jimmy. He said, has anyone started any book about Narcotics Anonymous? No one apparently had started anything about Narcotics Anonymous. So here he was with this gray book in his hand and this letter, and is about to throw it away. And I said, you can't throw it away. We have to have it. So we don't care what happens to other addicts all over. I said, what are you talking about? Of course we care what happens to addicts anywhere. They're addicts. We're all the same. He said, Sydney, you're so enthusiastic about this. You take the book and you start writing about input for the book. And that's exactly what happened. I had Hank M., who at the time had 16 years clean in the committee. I had two other addicts that I can barely remember who they were, so I'm not going to mention their names. We had a newcomer, it's always a newcomer, who's such a good secretary that can sit there and take the minutes. That is what we had, a newcomer doing the minutes, and we were writing input, and we would meet every week. In the interim, let me tell you what happened. When Bo, which was in 1977, when we had the convention at the Jack Tar in San Francisco, Bo was asking all these questions. When I saw the Gray Book for the first time, I think it was either 1980 or 1981. I'm not quite certain. So between that time, he said, we have to have a book. And what he did was he went back to Georgia, got a small committee together. From there, they worked on the book using the white booklet as a topic for each chapter. All of our things start with that in our basic text. Then he went all over. Wherever there was going to be a conference, Bo went, and he welcomed everyone. Any addict that wants to be a part of the World Literature Committee can be a part of World Literature Committee. And the addicts came from everywhere. He went to Kansas. He went to North Dakota. He went to Tennessee. He went to all these places, and each time he went, more addicts would join. They had no money. They asked for money everywhere they went. Addicts gave money that they had themselves. One addict even went out to the Red Cross and sold his blood so that he could take the money and give it to the World Lit Committee. This is literally what happened. When I got into it, it was just before our basic text became a book. It was like a year or two before. And when Bo came to the conference that we were going to have then in the Los Angeles Valley College, he walked into a small room. I don't have no idea where we were. We were in a very small room. We were working on the grade book, and he walks in with around half a dozen addicts from out of state. And he said, my God, I cannot believe that you're working on the grade book. And that was the beginning. That was the first time I met Bo, and we had worked together after that in world literature for 9 years. One of those years I was trustee. In I want to go before 1983, I want to take you to Warren, Ohio, where we went to after the Literature Committee came to Santa Monica that year. They asked me to come to Warren, Ohio. Now you have to understand, none of us had any money. Everything that we did, we paid for ourselves. Now, to have a World Lit meeting, you had to have papers, you had to have typewriters, you had to have copy machines, you name it. You had to have money to eat, you had to have money for the plane, money where to, place where to stay at. It was absolutely incredible. And we did this. These addicts did it. They did it. They were the ones that for those previous 2 years had been everywhere doing this to get a book for Narcotics Anonymous. I get to Warren, Ohio, and I said, I don't even have the address. They tell me it's an old schoolhouse that was donated to us. I get to Warren, Ohio. I said, is there a cat? Maybe he knows where an old schoolhouse is. No cat. Fortunately, one of Bobby's sponsees was there, and he met me. Bobby must have told him when I was arriving, he met me at the airport, and we go to this place. It's an old brick schoolhouse. There must have been around 50 addicts there, all of them working on the basic text. And I said, well, where do we sleep? He said, we have one room upstairs, the auditorium. We have mattresses all over the place. I said, where's the john? But we have one shower. I said, take me to a motel. They take me to this motel. You won't believe this. It was so seedy, this motel, that when the addicts came to pick me up every morning to take me back to the school, they wouldn't even come into the place. The walls were caving in, the floor was sinking. You know the kind of motel it is. I don't have to tell you. This woman is trying to understand. What am I doing? I'm there. The men are picking me up. Instead of coming in, they're all taking me out. The truth. She said, you worked hard today, dearie? That I've worked very hard. Let me tell you how we worked. We worked for 20 hours a day. We had a newcomer who did the cooking for us. We had others who were doing the copy work for us. It was unbelievable. Now they're trying to get me to cut and paste. Now I'm screaming, I don't want to cut and paste. I said, look at this beautiful writing that addicts have sent in, and you want to cut and paste it, cut it up and put it away. That's how we'll do it. And Bo very patiently was explaining to me this, and this. So what I did, I took my committee into the room, took a key and locked the door and wouldn't let anyone in or out. And we got the fourth step done, the basic text. And everyone there was working very, very hard. It was an unbelievable experience to see what these addicts did. Let me tell you what was there. There was a passion for this work that you cannot find anywhere else. I have never experienced in all the years of world service, I never experienced a passion like that. It was incredible. We did it because we were so excited. There was an explosion of growth of addicts coming into Narcotics Anonymous. We needed something. We needed a book. And we knew it. There was such a passion about doing this. And we worked 18 to 20 hours a day. It didn't matter what. If I came in late in the morning, you'd see all the heads going, you know, now I'm not good at guilt. I don't like it. So I got even less sleep than 3 or 4 hours a day. I'll never forget one morning, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and the next morning, what we had was every morning we had what we called a group conscious meeting. And every evening we had a group conscious meeting where we went over everything that was done. In the morning, what was done the night before, and in the evening, what was done all that day. And that morning, I knew we were going to have to come with whatever we did and bring it into this group conscience. Well, we did that. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, we had this little newcomer. Bobby, I'm sure, remembers him. He stole something to sell to me, so I'll never forget it. And we were just ready to, our heads were ready to split. And I said, we've got to get this copied. This is the last thing that needs to be copied. Go copy it, you know, on the copier. He looked at me and he says, what do you think I am, a slave? And he was like around 5 feet tall. I picked him up by the neck, put him up against the wall, and I said, you see these addicts? Billy Z was in a wheelchair there who had been hurting so badly, never complained, sitting there and working. And I turned around and looked at him, and my heart just went out, you know. And I looked at him and I said, you see, these addicts here, all of us, are working so that we could have a book for the addicts that come in. He said, you owe them an amends. And I have never said that to anyone before or since then, telling someone what they owe somebody else, And he apologized. He never got to bed that night because we got the work done at 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. The meeting started, the group conscious meeting started, and there we were doing it. And that was Warren, Ohio. In 1983, the World Service Conference of 1983 really changed the way NA operated. That was the first time that the trustees were ever nominated by the conference, by the RSOs. It was actually also the first day of the conference lasted 18 hours. It ended almost at 2 a.m. in the morning and started again at 8:30 in the morning. That is how we work. World Services work that way. And you still have meetings and days where you may have that. But then it was all the time. It was just something that we did. We didn't know. I was nominated for a trustee. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I mean, for 3 months after being nominated, I had no idea. I never got a call from anyone. I finally get a call from Dutch H from back east. And he said, and we had just met. And he said, Sydney, he said, do you know what we're supposed to do? I said, I don't have the slightest idea. And thank God, there were addicts there who were there with a lot of time clean. And I called up the chairperson of the trustees, who was then Sally E., and I said to her, can I help you with anything that needs to be done? And there was this dead silence. She said, Sydney, no one has ever asked me that before. And I'll tell you what we did. She said she lived in Orange County. I live in West LA. And I went down to the valley, picked up all the letters we got from addicts all over, drove out to Orange County. We sat there and we answered letters, long-handed. Everyone who had a problem. It didn't matter what the problem was. If it was a group problem, an area problem, a regional problem, anything to do with the tradition, whatever it was, we sat there and answered. But let me tell you, Sally answered most of them. I sat there addressing the envelopes. I didn't have enough experience. I didn't know what to do. But I wanted to help in some way. I'd take the answers with the envelopes, the letters with the envelopes, back to the World Service office and back to my home. But we did this for quite a long time. And it did not matter. We did anything. In the meantime, the World Service office was growing and growing and growing. One of the things that the trustees did, we had no money either. World Services had no money. So when we went to a conference or convention, at that time, the conferences were at the same time that the conventions were. So what we would do is the trustees had to pay for their own way, for their own room, for their own food. It only became a few years later where the World Service Conference was able to pay at least for the airfare and for the rooms. And after that, of course, it changed even again. But we had no idea what was our role as a trustee. And this was something that I learned. I'm sure that there were some. Bob B. was the trustee at the time, Sally E., Jack B., Dutch H., myself, and a few others. And Bo S. was a trustee by this time. And we are continuously searching, what is our purpose here as trustees in the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous? One of the things that we did know was that we were going to be the guardians of the traditions. We knew that, already doing that. We like a custodian who provided guidance to the fellowship. This was what was going on. This is what we were trying to do. We also were there to hopefully to see that Narcotics Anonymous never died again. And my experience as a trustee, I loved them. They were wonderful. They were not always very peaceful, to say the least. Let me tell you about a certain time. It's very difficult for me to share about because it involves a trustee who I respect so much and love so much, but I want to because it's the truth, and it's something that happened. We had the second edition of the Little White Book had already been put out with the stories. There was a lot of AA language in it, there are a lot of things in it that now the conference, the RSRs at the conference did not want in it. They wanted to change the little white booklet so there'd be a lot of Narcotics Anonymous lingo, language, and understanding, the philosophy. Well, Bobby and I did not agree. The conference mandated the trustees to do the changes. So for 5 years, they had me check the liaison between the trustees and World Lit. So they put me in charge of this thing. And I went around and did all these changes and then took it to the trustees and we went over it. Bobby did not want to make any of these changes. Now, I spoke to him just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and I said, Bob, do you remember the little white book? He almost choked on it when I said that. But he knew, and I knew what I meant. And I said, I knew that the book, the old little white book, had been put on whether it should be made into a historical document. And I had forgotten that it had been defeated and would not be. And when I realized, I said to him, what a shame how easily we take a history and just discard it and just let it go. Where is the value? The same thing happened with the literature. My first literature conference away from home was in Warren, Ohio. And how the literature was carried in was a huge trunk. All the literature, everything that addicts had sent in were in this huge trunk. And let me tell you, it was absolutely incredible. I read everything that they wrote, and I said, this is so beautiful. We never used it. We would take it and cut it up and put anything that had the word spiritual under a heading, spiritual. And I said, what happened? What are we doing? Tearing this up? What are we doing throwing all of this out? This is precious. Now, I believe that the white book should have been changed. Bobby did not believe that. He was fought very hard. He loved that little white booklet. You know what? I loved it too, but then I didn't understand the value. And it's almost the way what we do with addicts that serve so much time in Narcotics Anonymous, who give so much of service. And what do we do? They fall away. We don't know what happened to them. We think they were dead. All of that incredible experience that they have had, all the growth that they have gotten from it, and they're lost. We don't know what happens to them. I always felt that something should be done about that. I want to tell you about an experience. Do we have the time? I want to tell you about the experience that is also very painful to me. You can say it's sour grapes because I knew the writer, and it isn't, because everything I stand up here and tell you is the truth. We were working on It Works, book It Works. And we had a writer in the program of Narcotics Anonymous. This woman had received every prestigious award, not every, some of the most incredible prestigious awards that anyone could ever imagine. She donated her time. She wanted to do this for Narcotics Anonymous. She wanted to do it because she felt she could contribute something to Narcotics Anonymous. I have to be very careful how I say this. Everyone of that committee, it was a very small ad hoc committee, there were only 4 or 5 of us. Everyone who was there could not believe her one day's input. She had done the first step in 1 day, first draft. It was magnificent. One in the committee, no one is ever going to know who that is. I hope, I really do. Just threw it down and stomped out of the room. And I realized that something had touched a nerve. And for that year, I don't know if it was 6 months, I don't know if it was 9 months, I don't know if it was for a year, we worked on It Works. The first 3 steps were given to the conference. They said, continue doing what you're doing. Finally, the conference agreed with us. And finally, this one person was very unhappy because it was not his right, put some notes into someone's ears, and she was thrown off of the committee. They were not going to do it. Well, Let me tell you this, and this is very important for this reason. If nothing else, I want to be able to share with you how and the lessons I've learned from the things that we went through. I was so angry that 6 months later, a year later, anyone who wanted to push my button, all they had to do was mention that, and I went off. I said, well, let me tell you, you know how much I love Narcotics Anonymous. I wanted to leave Narcotics Anonymous. Where would I go? I was an addict. This was the only place that an addict could go to. There was no place I could go. I wanted to leave Narcotics Anonymous. I realized the injustice. I realized the pain that was causing the writer and myself and others, and most of all, Narcotics Anonymous, who would never have this. This is what I had to do. I had to get into the spiritual principle of forgiveness. It was the only thing that worked. It took me a long time to get to that place. I found out, like with everything that we learn about, that none of us can run. We have no other place to go. Everyone who has something to contribute to Narcotics Anonymous at one time or another will lose something because they are outvoted. Let me tell you, you all here know that. You will be outvoted. We all will lose. We must be able to accept that group conscience. And I did not want to. It was very difficult for me. I had to. And I had to do it with love. I had to talk to people addicts that I did not want to talk to. But all that was the outside thing. What happened inside had to happen. I had to get to that place of forgiveness. And most of the time I had to be one of the most disappointing experiences that I ever had. See, because it was not for me. This was something that I felt Narcotics Anonymous would have. I learned that we have to go through what we have to go through. We have to have the faith that a loving God is working in all our lives, and certainly in Narcotics Anonymous lives. And I say a loving God and I keep repeating about a loving God, because I've noticed lately that our literature that's being done is eliminating the word God from our literature. No one said to anyone ever to eliminate the word God, but I talk about it because my understanding of a loving God that I have found has only come from Narcotics Anonymous. My understanding of spiritual principles have only come from my experiences in Narcotics Anonymous, that I understand what a spiritual experience is. And that's what is so incredible about Narcotics Anonymous. Everything we learn comes from what happens in Narcotics Anonymous. I cannot get the understanding that I have anywhere out there. It's all in here. It is a miracle, truly a miracle that happens. That's my place and everything else, but it doesn't matter. If you were to ask me what was one of the most important things that you learned being in world service, I would have to say the spiritual learning about what it meant to have the spiritual principle of forgiveness. And the other thing was living principles instead of personality. You know how easy it is, we say in our 12th tradition, we all speak out. Principles and not personality. Try living it. Not only living it service, try bringing it into your life, your personal life, and live it. That's what Narcotics Anonymous is about. That is the freedom. We have freedom from being a victim for the rest of our lives by living those principles. I know I have not touched on I haven't touched on anything. I didn't go through the committees. Every committee. See, what happens when someone gets up and shares about the history, everyone brings their own perspective to it. And that is all that I can do, is bring my experience, my own perspective of it. And everyone who gets up, if we were to have someone really do a history, what we would need would be a 5 to 7 day conference with 20 different addicts, working hour by hour on every committee, trustees, board of directors, WSO. We'd write down the line: literature, PI, H&I, on and on and on. You'd need one person to give it, and still you'd only get one person's perspective. Perhaps this is what we have. We have a committee here, we have a meeting here, we have someone who comes up who has been so grateful for having been given the opportunity to serve in Narcotics Anonymous for so many years. And have, my sponsor said to me before I came over here, she said, Sydney, what is the worst that happened? Now, as I told you, I said, I have a blank in my head, a blank. Nothing is going to come out. She says, what is the worst that could happen? I said, I'm going to open my mouth and nothing comes out. She says, and then what's the worst that's going to happen? I said, I'll open my mouth again and still nothing will come out. I can stay up here and talk for hours about some of the things that happen, but they are my personal experiences. And I hope I've shared a few with you. I want you to know I did 70 pages of writing with dates. I threw them all away. I just took around 10 pages with me. I haven't even looked at the guidelines other than the first part that I read. And all my sponsees will tell you they knew this was going to happen. But this is what I tell them all the time, and my sponsor tells me. Anyway, I just want to tell you, God bless all of you. God bless Narcotics Anonymous. And I love you. Thank you. Say one more. Can I just say one more thing? Yeah. I want to say this because this is so important. I want to thank certain people. I want to thank Houston S., who had the courage and the concept to think that why couldn't the 12 steps help an addict? I want to thank Jimmy K., who was there all the time, even though it was a difficult time for Narcotics Anonymous. It was unbelievable. I want to thank Bob B., who out of his 35 years, spent 25 of those years being a trustee and is still here today. Yeah. I want to thank Bo S., who had this determination that nothing would shake him or take a side trip off to do something other than get and work on the basic text. I want to thank Doug, Greg P., who had one of the first service manuals, the tree. I wanted to thank Baba, who had so much to do, the vision that he had of where NA could go, and was very close friends with Bob Stone, and they shared all their ideas together. And much of what happened at the World Service Office in the 1980s happened because of the vision that Bob had and the ability of Bob Stone to carry that out, plus having his own vision. And most of all, I want to thank all of you, every addict here in service. Even if you're not in service, if you're at a meeting, that's being of service. That's every addict who continues on. And that's all I can say. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Sydney. I think it's safe to say that none of our lives will quite be the same after hearing Sydney explain her journey in narcotics. I think to encourage everybody to stay for the main recovery meeting to be held in the auditorium at 7:30, followed by the dance. This is not a recovery meeting, so we'll just close with once again thanking Sydney and thanking everybody for being here today.